Is there anything that you can think of that is unique to the sports
The
area?
people that are not being really served or spoken to or paid attention to.
You
Those are
see,
great.
what's the vision of Groupspot? How will you continue to transform?
Singularly focusing on sports management. There's just so many different apps. I think people really care about two things: traction and
Youth Sports Insider, where passion meets opportunity.
Welcome to the Youth Sports Insider. I am your host, Bill Flitter. Today, we have Mark Kossick from Groupspot joining us today. Mark, welcome to the show.
thank you, Bill. It's great to be here.
Hey, pleasure. We're so happy to dig into your story, hear how Groupspot evolved, your background. Now you have a long history with the NBA, so maybe we start there since I'm a basketball fan, and you're standing between me and my St. Mary's Gales right now on the NCAA as we're recording this. So,
Well, to be honest, Bill, I was not very good basketball player. So, if you can't play, join the league or join a team. So, that was always, a dream of mine. I kind of grew up in the late 80s with the Bad Boys and Magic and Bird. And then obviously Michael Jordan came in, the Dream Team in the
mm,
early 90s. And I just got, soaked into it. And, by the time I graduated college, that was definitely something I was interested in working in sports, but particularly in basketball.
yeah, and where are you from originally? Are you from
I'm
East Coast?
from the Northeast, but grew up in London during Wimbledon, just outside, actually in Wimbledon in '74, and then moved to Houston, and then up in the Northeast most of my life.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering where you got the love for the Bad Boys and Celtics, and it wasn't hard though, right? Because you had, I mean, obviously you look back and just watching Jordan highlights, and then you had Magic Johnson and the Bad Boys in there, and then the Celtics, and it was just, I don't know, there's something special about that era of basketball. Maybe because we both grew up in that time, and that's what we remember, and we were trying to do everything Michael Jordan did and on the court and failed miserably at it, but we still had fun trying, right?
Yeah. I think the hardest part was probably viewing it because it was kind of during that transition where most of the games in the early '80s were tape delayed games, and
Right,
trying to
yeah,
find those
yeah.
games on broadcast networks was tough. So it was kind of at the end of the '80s or into the early '90s was when you could kind of find this appointment viewing, and that became a thing at the time, and it was special at that time.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're absolutely right. I always say if I just had those Jordan shoes, I would have been a different player.
You
Right?
can still get them. I'm sure they're for sale.
Yeah, yeah. They may fit, but my body's telling me otherwise, right? Yeah. So, what were your roles at the NBA?
So mostly I came in with a video production appetite, realized I was better at kind of outside of an edit suite, and got into all different things, the licensing of our business, sales, communications, those area of our businesses. And my last kind of big remit was going over to Europe for about 3 years to grow NBA basketball across Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Wow.
That
Okay.
was that was a pretty cool assignment. I mean, there was all you need is one Tony Parker from France or one Dirk Nowitzki from Germany and
Yeah.
one Giannis from Greece, and it's really amazing the power of those players and the pride that those countries have in those particular players making it to the NBA and being
Yeah.
and
No.
becoming stars.
And if you look at the not that we're going to talk about the NBA here too much, and you probably know the
Yeah.
stats better than I, but I just remember seeing an infographic of the number one draft picks last year and the amount of international players that were in that, in the first round was the most I think ever. Somebody, if you know the exact stat, you can put it in the comments below. But it was, yeah. So you've done your job. You did, you did it. More and more people from yeah, other countries are coming to join the NBA. But let's talk about your transition then into Group Spot. How did that come about from the NBA to Group Spot?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I'd been during a long career at the NBA, I'd been an angel investor in a few different things. So I had some relationships, I had some appetite to, for startups, and I always had a huge admiration for founders.
Hmm.
And it was kind of at that time I was in my mid 40s, still had some steam left in the pack, and I learned a lot from trying to grow a fan base in a region of the
Hmm.
world where our live games were airing in the middle of the night. So we had to build a digital, so we
Uh,
rely on building a very large digital property. So we relied on, at the time, which were the big guys, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, a lot of stuff in language, and it was great. But increasingly, it became apparent that people were beginning to feel a little bit differently about their privacy. We were kind of moving away from putting everything online and making it readily available to everyone, because we quickly saw, some of the challenges there. So what they told you was fun and free began to feel like neither. And I think privacy was really the first pillar, and it was born out of my experience of using these large public platforms and kind of the mayhem that I was beginning to see. And
hmm.
while I was in Europe, I mean, Cambridge Analytica, that was a huge data
Oh,
breach.
right. Yeah.
Facebook, just too many bad things were happening. So I thought, there might be a sea change, maybe not with everyone, but with, a decent growing number of people that were going to begin to think increasingly about their privacy. And I knew that whatever we were going to build, I was interested in the group space, largely, born out of working with fan bases and trying to grow that.
Hmm.
Um, but I thought there was something there, and that was really became the central pillar of what we were going to build. And I started chatting with one of my former partners, a young man who I went to high school with, and he started on the first online lacrosse and hockey company called lax.com and hockey.com, and I helped him raise the capital to start that business. And I was like kind of like the annoying investor volunteer, so I'd pop up here and there, and just trying to learn something from the founders, watch them
Yeah.
in action. And it was just such a great experience. But we kept in great touch. And when we sold that business in 2009, we said, if we ever do this again, you'll do the tech and I'll do the sales and marketing. And so fast forward 10 years later, in 2019 was really when we started, kind of thinking about this business.
Yeah, interesting. That's yeah, no, that it at the time when you started it, was the idea of what it is now, is it the same? And maybe just in a nutshell, kind of explain maybe the
Sure.
history of that, where you started and where you are now.
Yes. So Groupspot is basically an all-in-one communications app that takes the friction out of running any large organized group. We saw a trend, people moving away from trying to run their groups on email. Nobody wants to surf through their email. Nobody wants to do it on group text. It's just too messy and time
Hmm.
consuming to find the stuff that you need. They also didn't want to use enterprise solutions like Slack and Microsoft Teams because that felt like work. So Facebook had some privacy issues. And so, we thought that perhaps if we started with privacy and added the utility, because what was happening 5, 10 years ago was people would do the same job that we're providing now. However, they would do it on email, and they'd send an email and say, hey, we need these ten items done. And it would all be links to various different applications. So, hey, you want to sign up? Use the Sign Up Genius. Fill out this form, Google form.
Hmm.
RSVP, use this app. You pay here, use this other app. So we just said, why don't we try to build these single purpose apps, build these single, solutions, app solutions into our app. And so we took the privacy, the utility, and when you put people in that environment, you foster that community because you're not worried about the privacy aspects of, ad-free, algorithm-free, influencer-free, unsearchable groups. That puts people in a safe place, and they're all
Yeah.
tethered around whatever the purpose of that group is. And then it fosters this amazing sense of community. And that was probably the secret ingredient that we didn't predict. What was that? And our starting point, just to answer your other question,
Yeah.
my partner was coaching a lacrosse team in Salt Lake City, and he said, and I was actually running a booster club for my son's high school football team. And so we said, whatever we start building, let's make sure this is our starting point, that it serves you as a coach and me as a parent booster. And then lo and behold, what we built, 80% of what we built, we found out serves all group types. Everybody needs a feed, everybody needs chat, everybody needs a repository for their media, attachments, all, polls, forms, signups, attendance. And so they may not need all those things, but we built those things into an app. And that's why, GroupSpot is not only a solution for sports teams, which we love, but also for many other group types.
Now, did you, and again, as you're building tech and you're and the more and more customers you talk to, right? There's this idea, and you got feature creep over time. How do you insulate yourself from that, from the feature creep as an organization?
I mean, it's funny because you got to balance that against the other people that tell you, hey, build this, put it out at 50, 60%. You're going to lose a lot of people, but the people that you keep, they're going to inform your roadmap. They will take that
Mm,
feedback, let them direct the ship. So
mm,
now what you're saying is you've got too many people with too many different ideas, and then you're not sure which path to follow. So
yeah,
before you have data, before you have money, the only thing you have is gut intuition.
yeah,
So, your experience, your gut intuition, and if you need to be smart about the choices you make, because if you go down a rabbit hole that you think, like say you say, hey, we really need this feature attendance, but you only know that 5% of 10% of coaches are actually going to use that feature. Maybe it's not worth it, to spend the next 3 months on that. So
mm, mhm.
when you're starting out, your team is small. It's not like we have multiple development teams working on different features. It was really just one team building out all these features. So we had to be very careful with which path we went down.
And when did you guys know? What was the aha moment that, okay, we have something here?
Well, it certainly wasn't when we had the MVP, because we built the MVP and it was we launched it in the middle of a global pandemic, and there was
Good,
nothing we
great
could have done.
timing.
We built an app that thrives on people getting together, event,
Yeah,
engagement. And there was none of that for like a year and a half, let's call it, right? And
yeah,
so
yeah,
we were beta testing with very small numbers of people because there just was so little activity.
yeah,
But as bad as that was, it was also a really great time because we again had to go back to gut and intuition because we didn't have the
right.
data and the feedback to kind of steer the ship. So we got the product much further along. So by the time we got out of the pandemic and the world returned to regular world order, that was when we really started to see the growth take off.
And I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but I love the idea that you're talking about your gut intuition when you're starting out, and as a founder, that's what you have, right? You have a need maybe that you're trying to scratch, right? And then you start talking to more and more people. But then, since you've been on that side as an investor as well, the investor who comes in with, hopefully experience, right? Not just money, right? They have some
Yep.
experience and knowledge in building a business, etc. So sometimes that experience and everything else goes counter to the gut feeling you have because you, as the founder, know the market intimately, right? Now, I can hear people say, well, of course, there's some tried and true things that you want to do, but, it's those think about those big decisions where, give you an example, maybe this would be pertinent to you. We think sports is a huge market for group spot. Okay. And maybe you start going down there, you position yourself there where the investor says, well, wait, what about all of these other group potentials, right? That you could do your
Yeah.
band, your different, just think, all the different other groups you have in your life, right? I'm curious to get your feedback on because founders always run into this, how you overcome that, how you battle that, so to speak. What.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna fall. You're gonna fall on your face a few times. I'll
Yeah,
tell you honestly, we thought that what we built initially would every family would want this solution.
yeah,
And the reality is families were just happy, having a text thread, because they were really not doing much organizing other than the random, barbecue or whatever.
Yeah.
Most families didn't have that level of activity that kind of required the sophistication that we provide. So they were better off just, with a big group text.
Yeah.
And
It's
that was
interesting.
disappointing because I couldn't even keep, my own family, extended family on the app. And that was kind of, we that was a learning experience, but we quickly, realized why did that not work? Well, because they didn't need the level of sophistication that we're going to provide to all these other more organized groups, more sophisticated groups. And yeah, I mean, you learn by falling down a few times, and you got to pick yourself up and not feel sorry for yourself and keep moving forward. The founder journey is a lonely one a lot of times, and you got
Yeah.
to, and that's the reality because absent of some large team and a lot of support, which you probably don't have early days, you really have to kind of pick yourself back up, dust off, and just get back on the treadmill.
Well, and that's why, that's why this podcast exists too, is to, let founders and even you don't even have to be a founder, but you're not alone, right? This is
Yeah.
typical, right? It's a typical journey, and there's nothing wrong with that. You learn and you move on. But all right, let's dig into specific sports and the youth sports market. So, as you know, very fragmented. So, when you were thinking about going, kind of you're thinking about user adoption. How did you think about that? How did you approach and how did you view the youth sports market?
Youth sports is interesting because a lot of these apps were born out of youth sports. And so credit to Team Snap, credit to Game Changer. They were first movers. They control a lot of the space.
Yeah.
Um, and they were the first to convince the coaches to stop emailing and use an application instead of email. And they quickly realized, hey, this is a shortcut for me to having to stop having direct communications with all these parents. And
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
worked really well for coaches. Um, I was never really that excited about the team management aspect. I just felt like there was a lot of saturation. I saw a lot of apps in that space. I think we could still, provide a good solution, and I'll tell you where we netted out on that. But I did see an opportunity, underserved opportunity with parent groups outside the coaching staff, especially kind of at the older levels, at the college level. So we found a nice niche there. But with youth sports specifically, what what we've seen that we feel like this is what happens is that, and I know just because I've had my own kids and I've kind of gone through this journey
Yeah.
myself, those some of the other apps are fine up to a certain point. It's when the kids get to they become teenagers, seventh, eighth, all the way through high school and college. The needs of your sports team change from get me to the game. Where are the directions? Do I have enough players to field a team? And what color uniform do I need to wear? Okay, that's youth level sports. That's maybe like sixth grade and down. Once you get to seventh, eighth grade, you might start to see some media coverage, certainly at the high school level.
Hmm.
Media coverage. The team might be fundraising. There might be merchandise stores for the team. There might be concession stands that have to get filled by parent volunteers. Carpools that need to be set up. Anyway, all these other elements that a lot of the team management apps don't focus on. It's just not part of the priority, right? The priority for them is how do I, create these sophisticated rosters. So we have rosters, we have games, we have all the basics elements of what you need to run a team. But it's these other things that are really essential to maintaining the team and it kind of like again skewing to the older audience where those tools become available. I still think we're a good solution for the younger skew with youth sports, but there's a lot more competition in that space.
Yeah, yeah, and uh, w speaking of competition, since you brought it up, there is, right? And it's getting noisier and noisier, right?
Yeah.
Uh, And for example, again, let's drill into this fundraising aspect. You guys you have some seed funding, right?
Yep. We did a pre-seed round. Yep.
Yeah, pre-seed. Okay. So when you're thinking about the landscape, right? And maybe not necessarily you in particular, but just the youth sports landscape and youth sports tech because that's the space you play in. You're approaching these investors. How how many iterations did you go through on, well, they may just say, well, they're just like you, but they're a billion-dollar company or they got bought already by private equity. Obviously, again, right investor, right pitch, but that as a young founder, and young meaning it's a new company, you're just going out, right, looking for capital. Can you just give us some insight into how to navigate that better, and so you're not talking to 500 investors before you get you know, your first check, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when they say friends and family rounds, like that's completely true.
Yeah.
And it- I'd say of my pre-seed round, 80% of that round came from my hometown because they were the
Mm,
beta pilots. They were the early testers. They saw how much improvement happened from, 2021, 22, 23, and so on since then. And they were believers, and I was also not
mm,
collecting, $50,000, $100,000 checks. Our minimums were $25,000, which, you know, some people can afford. So, or more people can afford. The barrier to entry was not so much, but
mm,
as you kind of move on to more sophisticated and institutional investors, you're going to need not just traction, you're going to need to show revenue. And so I'm a big believer in proof of concept. So, we're running a 64 team hockey championship pilot next month in Austria. And these teams are from all over the world. I just found out that none of those 64 teams are from the United States. I didn't
mm,
realize that. I was chatting with one of my colleagues.
yeah.
But, so it's a real growth opportunity. And, those are the types of anecdotes that really kind of get people excited.
Right.
We just signed our first private school deal with an athletic department out of Denver, Colorado, at a private school out there. And
Yeah.
all 26 sports are going to come onto the platform. And that's a deal that we can kind of mirror and repeat. The hardest part about any of these deals is doing the first one. But once you
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
have that proof of concept, that case study, that endorsement, that all those factors, if you do the job right and really treat the customer well and deliver, then you can really build on that. And I think that's where, that's when you might capture the more sophisticated institutional investors' attention.
Uh, Going back to getting those larger organizations as customers, you- again, if you're listening to this, you're a founder, you're doing a sports startup, you're trying to expand your business, whatever it might be. What's in that pitch that's gonna, and what advice do you have to short circuit landing a big customer like you just talked about? You mentioned one thing was case studies, right? That
Yeah,
obviously, proof, right? I mean, my follow-up question is, okay, I have no case studies, right? Literally
yeah,
just have this piece of tech, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not going to go pitch, an athletic director and say, "Give me your 26 teams," unless what we always try to do is start
Hmm.
small and say, "Let's do a pilot with one or two teams and
Okay.
see if you get a taste, and just tell me how this feels and how you like it, and is there something we should be doing differently, or what
Yeah.
what is missing for you to do a bigger deal with us?" So we've done a lot of that, and we've been lucky because the product has stood up for itself. We come out of these pilots, and we usually can land the customer because the experience has been good, because we
Hmm.
are offering something a little bit differently than
Yeah.
I think what everybody else is so focused on, X's and O's, and again, just kind of those integral parts of that sports tech space, games, rosters, things like that. Whereas, people are not really focused on the signups for the concession stand, or, fundraising, to keep the program alive, or, these other bells and whistles, forms for registration even. So that's where I would always say, whatever it is, you've built something, you're going to test it out with friends and family. Your people are going to abandon you, you have to just accept that. But also, people will stay with you, and especially if they see that they're part of the journey. I'll tell you one trick, and this is great for everybody.
Yeah.
You tell me, you give me an idea. I talk to my team. We think it's a great idea. We implement it into the app. The key piece now I need to do is go back to you and tell you, thank you for that great idea. If you go into the app store, update the app, your feature idea or your suggestion, your fix is now in the app. And people love that. And they just think, hey, holy cow, I'm talking to a human. B, they actually took
Yeah.
my idea and implemented it into their solution. So there's a lot of ways to win people over, and I think showing that you listen and you're reasonable, and not every idea you're going to obviously pursue. Those ideas you say, well, let us think about it, and we can't do anything near term, but we'll look into it. But other ideas that we know are just no brainers. It's like, hey, let's do this week. This was so obvious. How
Yeah.
do we miss this?
How
This
do we
was such a
miss
good
it?
idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so people do. There's a lot of ways to win people over, but that's certainly one of them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially early on. And I'm sure you give them naming rights inside the code. And since we're talking about codes,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
A little courtesy.
Yeah, a little courtesy. Well, Steve Jobs would argue with that, right? And Henry Ford might argue with that, right? If you ask people what they want, it'd still be a horse, a faster horse,
That's
right?
right.
So, you know, again, going back to what we originally had talked about is, okay, gut instinct. But again, I don't, it's hard because your users will come up with some really great ideas because they're trying to fix a problem that they have. So, I think where you, as a founder, you get into trouble is you've listened to everybody, and then you have a pot of spaghetti that doesn't serve a particular market. And as you know, you just got to make hard decisions sometimes. It's like, no, or not yet, right? That's 2 years out, a year out, right? Or
Yeah.
not at
If
all.
I see that with younger founders, they just don't have the experience to
Yeah.
rely on to know, should I go down, path A or path B? And then they go down the wrong path and they lose all this time and then they're out of money and then they have to, completely pivot out of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's just a product of being young and not having experience to lean on or having gone through difficult situations. Also, the other thing too is a young person's going to have a much harder time telling somebody, hey, great idea, let me think about it. We can't do anything near term, but I'll put it in the product queue, which means I disagree, I'm not going to do it, but but I've heard you, and
Right, 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 right.
maybe
Yeah.
our position will change, but it's going to go at the
Yeah.
back of the product queue. So
Yeah, no,
I think yeah, being young, having or just not having
it's a
enough
good point.
experience. But I was lucky because my co-founder, was a founder. I was an angel investor talking to founders in all across multiple types of businesses. I was in sports, deep in sports, in
Mm-hmm.
licensing. So, I think we had a good kind of, I always say there's three key people that you need to do something that we're doing. You need the hacker, the hipster, and the hustler. The hacker's the
I
coder,
love that.
the hipster's the head of product, and the hustler is the sales and marketing.
Yeah,
And I'm lucky because I haven't written one line of code, and we got thousands of lines of code. But my that's not my job.
right.
I didn't think I was going to do as much product as I've kind of been involved with, but because I'm on the front lines getting people on the platform, I'm all day listening to the customers, and
Yeah.
I'm saying, hey guys, I'm seeing a trend here. Multiple people are asking for the same thing.
Mm,
That's usually a signal to say, hey, you might want to
yeah.
consider changing that.
Yeah,
So
no, yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And listening, I think, in what you're saying, listening and communication are key when you're building and early on, and even after that. But do you? This is, I have no scientific evidence to back this up, but it's just really an observation. Are you familiar with the platform AppSumo? Have you heard
no,
of that? Okay. So it's you can they basically you list you can apply to have your app put on the platform. You People can buy the app or whatever your technology on the platform. But the point is and you get it at a discount early. A lot of times these products are early. And so that you're helping them kind of build at the same time. But the ones that I've seen that are successful are exactly what you just said. So if I'm interested in a piece of software, I can then give a review of that if I used it or am using it. but also ask questions. And though the founders that are on there and are active in their own profile are the
Mm,
products that I've seen iterate faster and grow and get better reviews.
mhm.
Uh, you know, I think in the beginning you have to listen, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is not unique to the sports, right, field. It's just when you're building in general.
Yeah,
I
we
think
have
is
just anecdotally, we have,
yeah.
we have groups on our group spot, and one of the groups that we have is an internal group we call group spot feedback. And so
Hmm.
when we identify a power user, we invite them to this
Ah,
group, and the group
love
is
that.
actually run by my head of tech, my partner, Neil Blaney. So people can ask whatever questions they want, and it goes
Okay.
right to the head of tech, and he has to answer everything. So, maybe some questions he doesn't want to answer,
Yeah.
but actually that's been, a really great thing when people have a passion or a real interest in what we're doing. I always like to send them an invite to that group so they too can ask questions and when is this coming or have you thought about this and why does this do this and why do I have to tap 3 times when it should take me 2 taps? And that's what it is. But it's a
Yeah.
great forum for us to gather information from real, people that are bought in.
Yeah, you know, when you come across a piece of tech that you're using and it just works, I don't know about you, but I know when I'm because I was early in the tech space too, and so, you know, like you said, you gotta double click stuff, you gotta hit enter, you gotta do, you know, versus it just saving, like just a simple, you're changing a form and it just saves automatically.
Yeah.
It actually causes me to pause and say, that just saved me a click. You know what I mean? It's like it just works, you know? Like
Yeah.
I don't have to do that extra step in order. But okay, let's take a look. Let's take a broad view of the market. You're obviously, you know, you're looking out, you know, forecasting and making predictions. And of course, you're not going to be wrong because it is a prediction. So, what do you see in the youth sports space that, you know, we should all be aware of how it's evolving, the good, the bad, like, you know, and the follow-up
From a
question to that is
tech perspective, or
whatever, market perspective, tech perspective, the space that you're in,
yeah,
like,
I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, something that's recently caught my attention, which is not a trend that does, it's a trend that makes me a little bit nervous, is in my state where I'm from is New Jersey. It's
okay.
getting harder and harder for our school systems to retain their coaches. So there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
drop in
Hmm.
people that are interested in doing that job, and I think for multiple reasons, which I don't have to get into, but I'm beginning to see a decline in that. I'm also beginning to see
Mm.
a decline in participation. Some of our
Mm.
biggest programs,
Okay.
whether it's lacrosse or football, we're seeing drops in the numbers, and I'm now beginning to pay attention, and I'm not sure if it's just that we have so many other activities that are made available, or maybe the power of their phone, or maybe kids just don't want to, be a part of a team if they're not going to be, the first
Mm.
guy, second guy, third, one of the top players and getting all that playing time and having to do the big commitment of practice and all that stuff. I'm not sure. So I'm just a little nervous that, that there might be something there. And I actually maybe attribute this to like a post-COVID maybe reaction. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping
Yeah.
that it's like with any new technology, right? I mean, now the schools will like literally, at least at my son's high school, they'll put his phone in a phone caddy during
Yeah.
class
Right. Yeah.
so that he doesn't look at the phone and he's dialed in for 45 minutes, which I love. But I think
Mm.
as we adjust to any new technology, hopefully this trend that I think I'm seeing, and I don't have the numbers to support it. This is more just me kind of observing on a small scale of my view that I can see. I hope that things kind of go back to large participation numbers, a lot of interest. Maybe we could support our coaches better. Those are some trends that I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, no, that's that. Yeah, and you bring up a really good point because I've heard that several times is, yeah, participation. I'm wondering though, you know, for a great example, flag, I coach girls basketball. So girls flag football is a new sport. that definitely took numbers away from when they join their club team, or at least, the numbers have gone down. They like you said, they shifted their interest. So that didn't exist before. Now they want to try it. So normally what they would be doing is doing basketball during the time. Now they're doing flag football. So I could make the argument, oh, well, girls' participation is dropping in basketball, right? Um, so I think there's definitely there's a lot more that kids have access to today. I think it's COVID. I think it's parents and the parent issues around coaches, right? And
Yep.
I think it's also, you know, they're, having coached at the high school level, athletic directors and principals, they don't, they get a couple complaints, legit or not. They
Yeah.
just don't want to deal with the next man up, right? They kind of take that, a lot of them do, and they would kind of take that
True.
attitude,
Yeah.
right? So, that's unfortunate that that's happening because there's a lot of good coaches that leave the sport so yeah, how we fix that, that's, hey, there's some opportunity out there yet that we still have to build for and create, right?
Yeah.
So looking back on your journey, and knowing what advice would you give, anyone that you've learned on that journey of just your, I'm sure we have a few people that would love to work for actually I know one of my coaches wants to work for the NBA doing stats, right?
Mhm.
He's a stats guy, right? Just graduated. From that perspective, but looking at your whole journey though, what advice would you give someone who's in a sports startup? And let's talk sports specific, building something, thinking about building something, you got lots of wisdom. So what would you
I mean,
share?
I think, I always admire kids that get into small shops. If you can get into a smaller business, you will ultimately wear a lot of different hats and get
Mm-hmm.
experience. Experience is the single hardest thing for young people to get. And
Yeah.
then they try to go get these. Everybody wants to go work at the NFL, but they can't. They can't all work at the NBA. And a lot of times they don't have any or the experience to back that up. But I see a lot of young kids, you're like, how do I get the experience? Well, be the equipment manager for your college team. You
Mm.
know, begin to get, some. I mean, those kids. That's like at a big time program. That's a real job. They may not
Right.
pay you. I don't know what they pay those kids, but I
Yeah.
mean, they're traveling on the road for the away games. They're involved with travel coordination. They're helping the players. I mean, it's a big time commitment. So the earlier, even if you have to, do it for free for a little bit period of time, experience is very hard to get. So, but if you're at a big league like I was back in the day, what you're looking for is experience, and you don't really care that it came from AAA baseball or roller derby or wherever you came from. They just care that you wore these different hats. And this again, the smaller the shop that you come from, the more opportunity you're probably going to have. The bigger the shop you
Mm-hmm.
go to, the more chance that you're fetching coffee, and you're not really going to get much from the internship. And then the second piece that you asked about is like if you're interested in doing your own thing, I think you kind of have to ask yourself when is if I'm going to do this, when is the right time to do it? Things have to line up.
Yeah.
For me personally, I was not going to jump into it in my 20s because I didn't know anything, and I was dumber than a rock for most of my 20s. And there was no way I was going to be able to start a sustainable business.
Yeah.
So I had to get experience. I had to understand what the workforce was about. And then ultimately, I kind of said after investing in a few things and having some winners, some losers, and having that and realizing that like the guy I want to be is as a founder. Like those guys
Mm-hmm.
have really great, the odds are stacked against them. They managed to push the ball, the big rock up the hill, and do it themselves, and the rewards are to them, like they've earned them. I mean, it's really, really difficult to succeed with a
Yeah.
startup. So, um, you got to be smart. And you got to figure out the right time. So for me, I needed the experience first before I was going to go do that. And you also, the other thing too was I was saying, hey, I'm in my mid 40s. I still have, gas in the tank. I can do this. Whereas if I was say mid 50s, maybe I just don't have as much gas or whatever. So you kind of have to just kind of think about all the variables in your life. Also, in my mid 40s, most of my younger kids were actually grown up, so I wasn't going to be missing large,
Yeah.
periods of time with my children. So it now is a great time for me to be involved with what I'm doing. So I'm lucky. My wife's supportive. That's another huge piece. If you're
Yeah.
married, I encourage you to get your wife's support because you can't you'll fail without it. But yeah, you got to hope that your family buys in, and I'm lucky because mine did.
That's awesome. No, that's actually really important. Having gone through that and knowing that I have a supportive wife, and somebody asked me, there's a job for a high school basketball. I used to coach high school, and a high school basketball coach right down the street from my house, and everybody keeps on sending me, "You gonna get back in? You gonna get back in?" And I said, "Let me tell you how the conversation's gonna go. I'm gonna tell my wife, hey, I really want to take this job and I want to coach high school again." And she's gonna, she goes, yeah, you can fill out that job application, no problem, but you can also fill out the divorce papers too. I'm like, "Yeah, that's how that conversation is gonna go." Um, but yeah, no, it is a huge commitment, and you're right. Timing is crucial into that. Okay, let's talk about then uh growth stats. You have your typical, I'm sure you're looking at user onboarding. You're looking at engagement as right, because you could onboard users and they could not, right? They just sit there, right? And they don't do anything.
Yeah.
So engagement is a big piece. Um, is there anything that you can think of that is unique to the sports area that maybe you're looking at or someone could look at as a metric of growth?
Unique to sports. I mean, for us, and I have to believe there's two parts to this because we were in the lacrosse business
Hmm.
with lax.com. We had that was a natural starting point for most of our sports conversations.
Okay.
What When you're involved with a sport like that, which is extremely insular, everybody talks, everybody knows each other.
Mm,
I'm sure hockey's the same way. You succeed in one or two markets. I mean, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that game just
yeah.
explodes. And the amount of warm introductions, most of the warm introductions still to this day, there's some tie to some lacrosse program, somewhere. And
Yeah.
so if you're lucky to find, a lot of times it's like an underserved market, and lacrosse
Mm,
is like it's a big sport. I mean, big-ish sport now, not obviously on the scale of like the big three or even
yeah.
hockey. But if you're able to find a niche and kind of serve the people that are not being really served or spoken to or paid attention to, those are great audiences. And
Yeah.
it might, you might, find, this great market in some smaller sport, or even a big sport like rugby, but is may not be hugely popular in America, or cricket, or, all these things. But for us, and I could tell you that, say we have 100 college sports teams using Groupspot. I'd say
Mm.
50, 60 of them are
Oh,
lacrosse.
lacrosse. Oh, interesting. So I hear
But
what I think you're saying then is, okay, there's the sport tech industry, right, as a whole, and you could go after it all, or look for a specific need maybe within a particular sport, an underserved market within that, start there, and then start building your bubble out.
I mean, it's a lot harder to compete. It's like us getting just singularly focusing on sports management. There's just so many
Right.
different apps and solutions.
Yeah.
Whereas we looked at the underserved market was parent boosters. I knew right away. I
Mm.
go, hey guys, this is going to be a home run. We can get parents excited about this, and we did, and it worked out perfectly. But yeah, I mean that applies to trying to figure out where your audiences are and where the opportunities are, but much easier to compete with the smaller underserved, get your proof of concept, run your pilots, get your confidence, build your product, fix your product, and then when you're ready for the big leagues, have at it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I remember speaking of that too. My boss at my very first job. So this was a long time ago, and a tech job anyway. He, I would say it had to be 8 years ago, 10 years ago. It seems like he started a he started with something. I saw it on his LinkedIn. He was doing something with this new sport called pickleball,
Wow.
right?
Yep.
Right? And he was doing paddles and something else, and I'm like, what is this thing, right? Pickleball, right? Sounded like a joke, right? Sounded like,
Yeah.
and anyway, and I mean, perfect example, talk about, a growing need. Uh, and now look at the sport, right? It's huge. So,
I mean, and you never anticipated where did girls flag football come from, right? Like
yeah,
the Jets
yeah,
and Nike, I think started this revolution 5 years ago, and it's now an Olympic sport. I mean, that
yeah,
isn't. I mean,
it's
and
insane.
take a like tennis, right? It was like not dying, but just like an older kind of
Yeah,
sport, and then they just made it mainstream by letting people play with less skill, with smaller rackets. The ball doesn't move as fast, and it's great, and
yeah.
everybody bought in. And now there's another spin-off of that. I think it's what I might butcher the name. Is it padel? Have
Oh,
you
I
heard of
don't,
that
yeah,
sport? Oh,
no.
it's a whole nother racket sport that was just born, and I think it's out of Spain, but it's amazing,
Yeah.
what how times change and where we put our energy and where the opportunities come about.
All right, so let's look ahead the next 3 to 5 years. What do you see? What's the vision of Groupspot? How will you continue to transform, be a part of this kind of sports market, youth sports market? Um, I don't know if you have any thoughts on to end on that.
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, a startup probably doesn't look 3 to 5 years out.
Yeah, that's true,
We're more
right?
like 12 to 18
Next,
months
yeah, I was
out.
gonna say, yeah, next week, right? Yeah.
Um, but our goal, I'd say, in the near term is, certainly, we have about 125,000 people on the app. I'd love
Mhm.
to have double that and really demonstrate that, we've got a really nice SaaS business model. We have a freemium product, great free tier, premium product. We have the ability to do subscription business through individual groups, or we can do enterprise deals with many groups. And I
Mhm.
think if we can go back and they teach you, in business school and any book you read, all these things that they tell you are so important, the team and the go-to-market strategy and all these other things, and they are important, don't get me wrong. But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, I think people really care about two things: traction and revenue. Now, if you
Right.
can demonstrate those two things in a meaningful way in 3 to 5 years, then we're either going to take a big investment, from a venture capital, or maybe it's family office or whatever it is. We'll take that and sell a piece of the company and really formalize the company and hire a lot of people, or we'll do it. Maybe we're at a point where we're self-funding and we don't take the capital, but we take the longer track. So, I think most businesses kind of get to that point where, at what point, do we want to give up board seats, to strangers?
Right.
Do we
Yeah.
want to lose control? Do we want to do these things? Or is it worth it not to sell that ownership, but take the slower path? But then with the slower path, you run the risk of somebody bigger coming in and, you know, just booting you out of the way. I mean, look at AI and how competitive it is with so many different players. I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, there's probably going to be 2 to 3 that survive and the rest just die. It's that's just the nature of survival of the fittest, I guess. But so yeah, so those are things that I hope to be in that position in 3 to 5 years. Probably sooner. I mean, I think that's more of a 12 to 18 month thing, but yeah, I think the way things are going right now. I mean, I feel good about I feel like the hardest trouble spots we've already worked through. I mean, there's plenty of landmines and potholes to fall through
course, yeah.
with any journey, but a lot of the more difficult ones we've traversed, and I feel pretty good about it. And the team, I can see it in the team. You know, when you have colleagues and you have people that work for you, you can see whether they believe in this or not. You know, is this vaporware or is this the real thing? And so,
Right. Yeah.
um, for us, it's always been about the real thing.
Well, and Mark, appreciate you sharing your knowledge, expertise with us today, and go check out Groupspot. You gave me a nice demo. It's definitely serves the the need of the families and the groups and in and around youth sports. There's nothing like it that I have seen for that type of communication that needs to happen. So keep up the amazing work. Maybe 12 months from now we have you back on and give us an update. And again, congratulations. I mean, I think a lot of young startups want to be at that 100,000 mark, right? And it
Yeah.
sounds like you're there. So again, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to keeping track of where GroupSpot is headed.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me. Good to see
All right, take
everybody.
care.
Take care.